My name is Oliver Schmidtke and I'm the Jean Chair at the University of Victoria, teaching in the History and the Political Science Department. And I would like to contribute to the debate on contemporary forms of Orientalism from a distinctly social-scientific perspective. And, you could say, how would you refer back to the seminal work that has been produced in the field of Orientalism, namely Said's 1978 book. And, it has received very legitimate forms of criticism in terms of oversimplifying the dichotomy between the Orient and the Occident and what this means for our perspective also of the Orient, our way of studying this part of the world. Still, and that is the argument that I would like to put to you here, is to say that in a very strange way and almost eerily Said's study on Orientalism still has to tell us a lot of things about current forms of discursive representation of the Orient and its impact it has on structuring the relationship between the West and the Oriental Islamic world, both internationally but also in terms of how we treat recent immigrants from the Muslim world in the Western context, in particular the European one. So, to a certain extent, you could say what Said did, and this is what fascinates political scientists, social scientists, is to relate his study of the relationship between the Orient and the Occident to forms of power, of political interests that are driving public representations of the Orient and how it is being used for very distinct political and social purposes. And what Said did was to look primarily at the post-colonial fights against the justification of the occupation of the Arab world by Western powers. And you could, very justifiably so, argue, look, that is very much a part of past history. And we live now in the 21st century, and isn't this, his study somewhat outdated? And indeed, if we look into where we are at in the 21st century in terms of how we in particular deal with, let's say, the Muslim minority, within a way an Orient that has become a normal feature of contemporary European, also German life, public life. Think about the presence of so many Muslims that have indeed become part of our public life. You could argue that the norms of modern liberalism are far more accommodating. The human rights approach has established a paradigm in which, the very crude form of stereotypically representing the Orient, of forms of racism that Said refers to, is no longer justified. On the other hand, however, and that's what we see recently in the European context, is a backlash against multiculturalism, the endorsement of cultural diversity, but in a very selected way. If you look at who is being targeted by the negative, also or stereotypical representation, it is primarily a form of Islam that is depicted in highly simplified and also negative terms. After 9/11, there is a new environment, a new political environment in which these forms of the threatening form of Islam that is not compatible with Western civilization, has flourished and has gained quite a presence in public discourse. And so what we could say, and that is where I would like to push this, is what Balibar calls a new form of differentiated racism, one that is no longer based on biological difference, but one that is based on cultural difference. The argument here that certain forms of cultural and religious practice are incompatible with the West, that this provides a new justification for forms of social exclusion. And that is what we see. Look at what happens in England, in France, in Germany, immigrant communities that are so clearly discriminated against and exposed to forms of social exclusion. And I think that Orientalism gives us a very good analytical framework for coming to terms with this.